Board games are making a huge comeback in this country as players prepare to test their knowledge of everything under the sun. But there's a new game in town that tests your feelings rather than your intellect. It's called the poverty game. Now, living on welfare is no game to the hundreds of single parents in the province who count the days waiting for their meager check each month. If you've never had to budget so tight that a bar of soap was a luxury, playing the poverty game will help you understand the feelings and frustrations of those who live in poverty at one of life's critical pressure points.
Hello again, and welcome to another program on Pressure Point. I'm Ken Wotherspoon, your host for this program, and we're here to talk about the poverty game. That sounds like a contradiction in terms. I mean, what's a game about poverty? Unless it's the big guys against the little guys and all that. But we're going to see some animated clips of an actual game called the poverty game. We're going to have some reaction from some of the players. But here to help us introduce the game are two people who know quite a lot about it, Leslie Black and Gus Long. And these two persons have come into the poverty game at different levels. Leslie, you are a chairperson of a very important working unit for the United Church of Canada and the BC Conference, having to do with Health and Housing, Social Services Committee. Tell me why your church and this particular working unit thinks that we should take a look at the poverty game, in fact use it.
Well, we think it's an important educational resource that can help those of us who are middle class in the church to get a better idea of what the concerns are for people who live on welfare particularly, and what the life issues are for people in that situation.
I guess it would be important before we talk about how people can identify with certain elements of other levels than our own, to know a little bit about the poverty game, and I think Gus can help us here. What is your involvement with the poverty game, and can you tell us a little bit about the game itself?
Well, first of all, when you talk about the poverty game, game in the title does not mean a game on a board, right? Okay. Although it is a board game. It refers to the political games, the social games that are played with the poor. The game started out as a joke. It was the result of a welfare recipient wishing that she could put her welfare worker on welfare for 3 months to give her a taste of what it was like. She felt that maybe then the worker would be more understanding and less judgmental in her treatment of welfare recipients. That's how it started, as a joke. But it proved to be such a powerful tool that the low-income group in Dawson Creek called Branching Out, and the person who was then chair of Branching Out, Penny Monkman, and two child care workers, Garth and Joyce Tyler Nair, actually developed it as a full-day workshop. And it was funded by Plura, both provincially and nationally.
Plura being the Presbyterian, Lutheran, United Roman Catholic, Anglican Church group, put some money into this, for these two welfare people actually came up with
there were
a game.
6 recipients.
6 recipients.
And 2 child care workers.
And they wanted just to reverse the tables a little bit and invent something whereby people who really didn't understand, like the welfare worker obviously doesn't always understand what it's like to be on welfare. Mm-hmm. So what, how is it played?
It's a role simulation game.
Okay. And
it takes a full day. And you actually experience all the events of being on welfare.
A role simulation game, mm-hmm. and it's therefore structured in such a way that when you come into the game, somebody hands you something and you begin assuming a role.
This is
that
who
right?
You are.
Okay. I think this would be a really good time to just go into some footage of the game when it was played at First United Church fairly recently. We'll just take a look at that now.
For Pamela and Patricia, who are a family of 2, welfare rates will be reduced by $55 a month. The rest of you, your welfare rates will be reduced by $35 a month. That means that next month you will collect less money. You will continue to collect less money until I tell you. The other thing that happens is on welfare, you may not earn any money at all. Every cent that you earn must be declared and will be deducted from your next welfare check. Now what happens is,
Salem women's shoes.
Once more, Patricia.
Cannot afford them.
With $20 for the next 2 weeks for anything else.
You only have to pay out once more here, then you get it back here.
That's right. Oh yeah. Because that was week 1. Could you move my penny to the 1 and tell me what it says?
Bookstore has if you want. Cost is $5. Go to the library.
Forget. Yeah. Believer, strong believer.
I
don't let my kids have to.
1, 3, 4. What's your
Go to the library. No, you want to go for like $8.
No way. But I want to pay my groceries.
After I pass the next one, $4.
You better not spend any money during that week.
I can't.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to decide whether to go out to a party or not. I'm so depressed. I got to get away from this kid. He's driving me nuts. I'm going to go out to a party. I'm going out to $10 for babysitter. Okay.
Going?
Give yourself a treat. I'm going. I got a hyperactive kid who's just been pulled from school. He's driving me nuts all day.
Well, they were talking about the puppy.
I'm probably gambling a bit, but I feel it's very important. My child is very upset about his bike having been stolen, so I've got another one.
Well, I just moved too, and there's a hot dog sale, so I think I can afford that.
1, 2, 3, 4. You mean 20 higher is my age, isn't it?
the 3 least credible sentences in the English language. The check is in the mail. Of course I'll respect you in the morning. And I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Okay, well I am going to try and help you. You see, you haven't been on welfare very long. And you may not have your priorities straight. So I'm going to help you set your priorities. I'm going to quote to you from this book, which is the ministry's manual, policy manual on child abuse and neglect. Now you'll be interested to know that amongst the cases, the high-risk cases for child abuse and neglect are the following: where there's poor housing, overcrowding, financial crisis, loss of work, family breakdown, separations, and alcoholism. So by definition, you're all in a high-risk category because of the separation, family breakdown. Also, there may be a problem with housing and everything. I mean, I leave that up to you, according to the information on your cards and the amount of money you get. Now, in this book, neglect is defined as gross or repeated failure to meet a child's physical needs. And later on in the book, those needs are defined as food, clothing, medical attention, safety, shelter, what have you. In the book, there's a special section addressed to teachers to alert them to the symptoms of child neglect so that they can report them to the Ministry of Human Resources. And one of those indicators is as follows. A child who is inadequately dressed may be considered neglected. If the child is being stigmatized by his peers for dirty, inappropriate clothes, this may constitute unnecessary emotional or physical neglect. Soap is very important. However, you might wonder when I read that, this may constitute unnecessary emotional or physical neglect. You may wonder, what is necessary neglect? What is necessary neglect? Now that may be answered in part by another section on this same page. You have to think about what this says. Children who are undernourished and coming to school without breakfast and who go without lunches often are suffering from neglect that is unrelated to poverty. Think about what that's saying. When you're on welfare, soap is far more important than pampering. Appearances are far more important than reality. Remember that when you're making your decisions. Go on with the day.
It's a choice.
I'm not buying. Not buying. Okay.
Poor little kid.
Going to be sloshing around in the water. You should see.
Someone just said, I don't believe it. And for that reason, I have to interrupt at this point to make you believe it. I'm going to try and forestall a few questions. Some of you may be wondering why all the identities are female. The answer is that the majority of Canada's poor are female. And the majority of Canada's welfare recipients are female. Single parents and their children are the largest single group of people on welfare in any province in this country. The other reason is because this game was developed by single parents on welfare. You are playing actual people. Everything that happens to you in this game actually happened to them. The money that you receive, the money that you pay out, are the exact amounts that they received and that they paid out. The events on the board, the events on the chance card, the events that I bring to you around the table, they are all real. Nothing is made up.
Well, you were, Gus, I'll go back to you again, and we'll just stay with you for a minute on this, because you have a note of authenticity about it when you say, yes, it's true, and there's nothing invented. You have had something to do with welfare.
I'm a single parent. I was on welfare for many years.
So you know about what you're talking here. It gives an accurate, is it accurate enough that even in a single day, the people who are playing the game, albeit role-playing, do they actually get caught in the identity of some of these people and begin to feel what it's like? Do you feel it's true?
They laugh, they cry, they get angry.
They do.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I think very much so.
Leslie, you've played the game.
Yes.
I mean, you've been one of these people who were given a card.
Right.
Tell us about your experience. You were given a card and you assumed a role.
Yeah, I became the identity of a mother who had 2 children, who was a single parent. And I had a number of situations that would happen to me during the month as I'd be trying to go around the board and make it through the month, which becomes the whole goal almost of living, is making it through the month till the next check day. My experience as a community worker at First United Church is that that's often what people are doing when they're living on welfare, is just trying to survive, make it through the month.
Can you think of any specific things that our viewers could feel into with you about the specific part you played in one of the times that you played this game?
Hot dogs?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we had hot dog day at school would be one thing that came up several times. I'd get a card that said, it's hot dog day at school, your children want to buy a hot dog. What are you going to do about it? And you have a choice of deciding, can you afford $2 for a hot dog sale? Or does that mean that you won't be able to get enough regular groceries through the month? Or does that mean that you can't buy your son a pair of shoes that he needs? Like, the budgeting becomes so tight, and there's never enough. You start out without enough money on your check to make it through the month.
There's a lovely thing. The last time we played the game, one of the participants said that he really never understood that a hot dog could be a luxury item.
Yes, yes.
Gosh, you nod. I mean, you're talking about, I mean, a lot of us, like you're talking about the middle-class person trying to identify with some of this stuff that's the nitty-gritty, real stuff for more people than the middle-class people. Is that right, statistically?
Well, yeah, when you talk about people on welfare, for instance, I mean, it's extendable to anyone who's in poverty, whatever situation. This just happens to deal with one particular type of poverty, but there are many others. The effects are the same in all cases. The game was designed originally to sensitize professionals who are in the helping services, but it is remarkably effective in giving people a real taste of a life in poverty. It sensitizes everyone.
Yeah, and in the some of the viewers are probably saying, you know, having even got a look at the clips where these people are starting to feel the roles and so on, and laughing and crying, beginning to fight about little things, and then the prioritizing of life at a level where you're talking about a hot dog day instead of, will I go to Palm Springs or will I take my trip in Europe on vacation this year. You're talking about amount of money that you got to decide what to do with on a, you know, with your children on a certain day, and if you make a certain decision, are those kids going to be put down one more time, or if you're going to help them be put up to a certain level. You're talking about this kind of stuff.
That's right.
And people start getting mad at things like that, you see?
You're talking about a life.
I'm getting mad. I'm thinking about watching those clips, and I'm thinking about, well, I mean, why do we allow stuff like this? And I mean, what about those people who are on welfare anyway? And I mean, why did they get on welfare?
Why?
In the first place.
Because they have no other option. You see, the problem is that these people come into the system, the welfare system, with a problem. If they didn't have a problem, they wouldn't be on welfare. Okay? The problem could be marriage breakdown, loss of employment, disability, accident, illness, whatever. They have a problem, the problem brings them to welfare.
That could happen to any one of us.
That's right. Welfare is a whole set of problems in itself, and it just adds and compounds the problems that they already have when they come into the system.
What about the people who cheat on welfare?
Down to my favorite
well, we got to think about
down to my favorite statistic again. The number of welfare recipients in the whole of Canada convicted of fraud in 1 year is 0.1%.
You're kidding.
The number of lawyers convicted of fraud in the province of Ontario in 1 year is 0.3%, which only goes to prove that either welfare recipients as a class are more honest than lawyers, or they're a lot smarter.
You make your point. I would just like to break in here again. I think our viewers should have an opportunity to listen to some of the participants tell from that poverty game that was played at First Church, tell what it was like to play the poverty game. And let's listen to these participants.
When I started out, I thought that, you know, well, this is just a game, and I'll play it, and I'll make it, and I'll struggle, and whatever it takes. But now I'm really angry, because it really is not just a game. It's a struggle, and it's survival, I find. I thought that maybe, you know, that I would get by without, you know, spending little extras on recreation or on leisure or just treats for the kids. But that's not so. That's just not the way it is. It's a game of survival. Each day can just bring you right down flat from unexpected things happening in one's life.
I think it's being exposed to something that's completely hasn't been part of my life at all. Becoming aware of what it's like to be in the shoes of people who live differently than I do. It's been a real eye-opener. Recognizing that, or experiencing what it's like to really feel powerless and helpless. And no matter how responsible I want to be in this role, how I feel, I experienced feeling really good about coping, and yet no matter how I tried to cope, there were always new difficulties that came up that just knocked me down again.
And I've always thought about it, known about the cycle, felt bad for people in general, but to have that feeling of month after month, day after day of living and feeling helpless and powerless, and like you wonder if you have any social life left, like you wonder if there's anything to celebrate. To experience that in a more personal way was probably the most strongest thing for me that affected me about it.
The role that I was given to play was a situation where the person couldn't work because of health reasons, and the amount of money she was given and the high amount of rent that she had to pay and utilities and so on. There just wasn't enough money left for even food to get through the month. And if certain things came along where she did come across some money from gifts or from winning something, a certain amount of that would be taken away from her payment the next month. And going through not doing anything extra, having to deny her children even pictures for school and or hot dog days or that sort of thing, just so they have the food. A sense of just feeling blah by the end of the month, that this was, we were living, but what quality of life was there? It was just a sort of an existing.
I've identified with the person whose part I'm playing, as it were, and I find myself trapped I find myself almost beaten before I begin. And I find that I'm taking on an attitude that, okay, it's me against them, and I'm going to do everything in my power to win, regardless of what that does to my morals or anything else that I might have valued in the past. I'm also finding myself getting angry, obviously without due cause, but certainly getting very angry at my child, because innocently enough he has been the cause of some unexpected expenditures, and these come as a shock, and at a time when I'm doing my very best to make ends meet, suddenly something comes up that he has been responsible for, or even not responsible for. For instance, the stealing of his bicycle. And I think the feeling of being really beaten before you begin, of being trapped in a no-win situation, and the tendency to take it out on someone who's very dear to you, namely your only child, and all of the things that might possibly lead to. It certainly has been an experience for me, and it'll give me pause to think about this whole matter much more deeply than I have in the past.
Okay, we've listened, and we've seen some of the things that you've talked about. Leslie, people actually starting to live the role. For one day, they should be so lucky that some of the conditions you mentioned earlier, Gus, about how any of us could get on welfare and get into that cycle that keeps us there. How does one get out of the welfare cycle? You work on the east side of Vancouver, out of First Church, on a community team, and you're rubbing shoulders with people every day who are caught in this cycle.
Certainly am.
How does one get out of that cycle?
Yeah, it really is a trap too. I experience every day people who come in to see me who end up in tears often because they feel so trapped they can't get out of they feel backed into a corner and they just can't get out of it. So we work on a number of different levels, and I think the church needs to do that as well. One is to help people know that it's not their fault, that they're not, even though they feel like they're being punished for being on welfare, which in effect is what the policies are doing of the provincial government. They're being penalized for not finding jobs. Actually, it's a social problem that we have, where we have such large numbers of people who are living at a level that is far below the Statistics Canada poverty level. It's about half of the level that is suggested to be reasonable to live in Canada. And so we spend time talking to people, helping them realize what their rights are, helping them get connected with other people. I believe it's very important to help people start their own groups, welfare rights groups, for example, and that's something that happens as part of the game as well, as far as the poverty game, that people connect with each other.
How do you do that? Like as a community worker, you're not at the poverty level. You're identifying with people at the poverty level. You're working with these people. How do you gain enough trust and respect by those who are caught in the vicious cycle and circumstances have victimized them?
Right.
And what is there to keep them from, pointing a finger at you and say, yeah, it's okay for you to come in and tell us how to live our lives?
Yeah.
Is that the way you work?
Well, I wouldn't do that.
Okay,
often people come to see myself and other community workers at First United with a problem. They say they can't make it through the month, or they have a problem, something that's happened with them. They're having a disagreement with their worker, or they've heard that they have a right to something that they haven't been getting. So we do advocacy work. We help people know what their rights are within the system that exists, and we help people go through the appeal system, through a two-level appeal system, the second part of which is a tribunal, which is a place where decisions of the worker can be reversed. And we do some looking at the actual GAIN Act, the Guaranteed Available Income for Need, which is the act that governs welfare and handicapped persons assistance. And so we can look at that act and reinterpret it in a different way and help people to get...
That's what you mean by advocacy at your level.
And we also spend time helping people find housing and that kind of thing, looking for low-cost housing, helping them to look at how to survive within the system that they're caught in, and how to work in a small way to change it. But we also recognize and tell people that we understand that it's a problem they're caught in, it's a societal problem, and that we're concerned and we're trying to do something to bring about change for that.
Just the fact that you get people together and get them talking to one another, does that help them at all? Like,
Sure. Often people get so depressed that they can only think about how to get food for the next day. So meeting other people who are in similar situations gives a lot strength. And
I keep thinking
energy.
about all those lawyers that cheat compared to the number of people on welfare who don't cheat, and that troubles me a bit. Is there a cycle, Gus, or are there levels that you feel about loss of control on your life and gradual ownership of your life again? You've been there. How does it feel? How do most people come at getting ownership of control?
Part of the game, not everything in the game is depressing and negative, all right?
Yeah.
Part of the game deals with how people can regain some measure of control over their lives again by forming self-help organizations, by learning that they really are not responsible for the mess they're in, that it is, as Leslie called it, a societal problem.
Yeah.
And getting rid of their guilt and their fear and taking some measure of control back. And that's what helps people to survive.
Yeah. The frustration that these people and that you must have felt and that you, Leslie, feel working with people living in poverty, with other levels of society, bureaucrats, church people like myself, politicians. How do you engage that without getting totally angry and blowing the top?
Well, I guess it calls for a good deal of patience, and for me, as a person connected with the church, I have a very strong sense of hope, and hope that things can change. Hope that that the gospel, for example, and the Hebrew scriptures speak very strongly about God's real deep concern for justice for the poor, and for me, there's a strong calling.
So you're never going to give up. Like you're never going to lie down and say it's overwhelming. But I'm thinking about the persons caught in that who are, even if they sense some of your hope, Gus, what do they do with all this anger?
Well, hopefully they use it constructively to change the system and to change their own circumstances.
Okay.
And you get angry, you get stubborn. Some people it destroys.
And I think this little vehicle called the Poverty Game is one way that you people are helping our community understand what it's like to help us dialogue and understand one another. I want to thank you both very much for being our guests today on Pressure Point. This has been a special pressure point on one of the heavy pressure points of life, what it's like to be in poverty, and the game called the Poverty Game. Ken Wotherspoon, your host, saying thanks for being with us.
Anyone interested in holding a poverty game workshop can contact Leslie Black at First United Church, 681-8365. That's 681-8365.